Thank you for auditing the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who's going to be reviewing the album Space Heavy by k.rool. Now, I think it's actually pronounced Krule. I just read before doing this review that he did not name himself after the Donkey Kong Country character, that he's named after King Krule, the Elvis movie. Elvis has like 30 movies and like 2 or 3 of them are good. King Krule is actually one of the good ones, so that sort of makes sense. It does disrupt a little bit of the image that I had of him, because when you see a very pale, red-headed, kind of nerdy-looking guy who names himself after a interesting video game character, it sort of fills out a whole picture for you that is broken by the name not being based on King K.rool. So, I don't know. I found that interesting. That means I don't get to tell you the story about when I first beat Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo. I don't even get to tell you how I figured out to beat my son's friends when they play as King K.rool in Super Smash Bros. Because it's impossible, a stupid big belly, but I figured it out with my main, Mr. Game & Watch. But I'm not going to get to talk about those things right now, because honestly, King Krule definitely goes beyond the boundaries of kind of a nerdy niche guy. This album cements what I felt listening to Man Alive, which is he's just this great and very interesting voice. Very, very capable of establishing very interesting atmospheres. I think, ironically, atmospheres. We'll talk about why atmosphere is an ironic term to use later. I'll probably forget. But yeah, especially when we put him in context with some of the other artists I review, like the very, very Thunderground Carpet Garden, or the much more popular Steve Lacy, there's this whole kind of crew of guitarists who are making bedroom pop music that allow guitar to be vulnerable, that allow guitar to sound janky, sometimes sound thin, sometimes sound like you want to put more effects on it, that creates a real intimacy. Like there's a real underground bedroom guitar moment happening. And King Krule appears to be one of the forefronts of this moment. And it all goes in service of this amazing atmosphere, which is often emphasized with sort of shoegazy effect, like not really shoegazy effects, but shoegazy feelings of echoes, and he plays a lot with whammy bars. So if you don't know, the way a guitar works, you just sort of, you play a guitar, and over here is a bridge, and some electric guitars have a whammy bar where you can go, you can move all 6 strings down a little bit, all at the same time, and that creates a slightly detuned sound. Often this album feels like he's playing just slightly detuned. Pitched or paired with this are intentionally janky drums, where either it'll be a drum machine which is on a loop but the sound is sort of intentionally thin, or it'll be a drummer playing amazing drums on this album. And there's a real drummer playing. It's some of my favorite drumming I've heard all year, but it's intentionally sort of ugly. The kit sounds a little bit poorly constructed, right? It doesn't sound right all the time. So all that creates this wonderful, otherworldly, alienated, echoey, space-like, distanced, depressed, bedroomy style feeling. What I like that he does on almost every song is he adds what I'm going to call break lines. These are lines which are a line, sometimes just a couple words, repeated to the point where they start to take on new importance in their repetition. And then this allows the song to change. And usually at this break point, the whole song will break into something different, usually higher energy, usually much more kind of punky. Because there's also there's like a jazzy vibe and there's like a punky vibe. And it's always in this nice balance with this sort of odd production and atmosphere that permeates everything. So these break lines usually allow it to go from that jazzy more to that punky style. There's not much song construction, and I think this is intentional. I don't think that King Krule is too cool or is not talented enough to have a verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, a standard pop thing. I think it's just he finds it more interesting, and he gives us much more interesting, sometimes songettes, that are barely even songs. Instead of being verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, it'll be like verse, some other thing which you might consider a chorus, and then maybe the verse again, and then like that break line will show up, and then there'll be a weird something, and then we're on to the next song. I particularly want to, because the thing about this album is it's really good. And that's a goofy thing for me to say on my always positive channel, but it's really good that each listen brings something more to it. And in particular, the thing I really want to focus on, not just in terms of songwriting, but in terms of production, are the way that the saxophone and like what sounds to be maybe a string quartet, how those two things are used. Sometimes they'll be featured, sometimes they'll be in the background, sometimes they'll be so far in the background that literally while I was getting set up in my room here, while I was moving over the music stand that I record on, while I was getting the Kubrick book all set up, I was listening to the album on my headphones and I was like, oh my God, there's strings in the back here. I didn't hear that the first 5 times I listened to this album. Amazingly restrained and really, really good. Now when it comes to the lyrics, I can't help it. You're going to hear my famous British accent. It sort of makes you say, right, what's he going on about? I turned Australian at the end. But before I do that, I am going to promote myself. Please smash the like bucket. 6 minutes in, I think I've made some good points. I'm going to make a lot better points. Smashing the like bucket helps me. It helps keep engagement up. Subscribing is good. Also, I've simplified my merch. I only sell this. This is the only good piece of merch I ever made. It's a mug. It's based on that. It's hand wash only. This is the version that I took today out of my father's house. He died a couple months ago, and he bought a mug to support me, and so I drink it in his honor. So if you want like the one piece of Professor Skye merch, this is it. And you take a picture and share it on IG. I will share it to my story. Is that what people do? I gotta be more YouTubey, you know? So let's talk about the lyrics. Right, what's he going on about? Well, there's a couple things. Obviously, the theme here is space. And I liked Man Alive because the theme in Man Alive basically was existence. But here it really is space in the terms of physical space between him and a partner and the void, the blackness of space. So it is both space and space. And that homophone, those same words with multiple meanings, is a well that he goes back to not too much, but just enough. Also, there's his general presentation of himself, of how he is. And again, that's probably why it's better to think of him as a bizarre King Creole as opposed to a King Krule. I'm sorry, to say Kid Creole? A bizarre King Creole as opposed to a bizarre King Krule. Because he really does present himself not as like a nerd, but really as sort of a sad guy. But this album in particular is very obsessed with the sea. And according to what I read, he now lives in Liverpool. And so, you know, beyond obviously the Beatles and the soccer teams, counting you, Everton, it's also a very important city for its relationship to both the River Mersey and its proximity to the ocean. So I'm of, you know, British and Scottish descent. I've spent a fair amount of time there. And it's important to remember that not all seasides are the same. You know, British seasides, much like New England seasides, are often kind of bleak and just sort of sad. The image that I had multiple times, I know he's from London, but he lives in Liverpool now, is sort of in the Beatles movies, Ringo often is seen near water, near the Mersey, just kind of walking around sad. I mean, in Hard Day's Night, there's the great scene to the song This Boy, where he's just kind of walking around. In Yellow Submarine, it opens up with him saying, Liverpool can be a lonely place on a Saturday night. It's only Thursday morning. That kind of like down on your luck, contemplative, depressing British seaside aesthetic permeates everything here. And along with that is a kind of solipsistic internal thinking. Almost dissociative thinking, like someone who's looking at the world and basically can't even handle all of the input, you know? Because that it's actually, I'm going to go a little bit further here. It's actually kind of connected to Sartre and his existential writings, in particular a work like Nausea, where the person it just gets so overwhelmed by the nature of existence and everything that's there that he gets nauseous. That kind of ponderous pondering, these existential ponderings, feel like that's the other part of it. So when I listen to this album, I picture a lonely, pale red-headed dude walking along the Mersey, kicking rocks, and then thinking way too hard about the rock that he just kicked. Okay? Does that make sense? And mixed in with all of that is it's a breakup album. So all that space, there is a very human element to where he's not just contemplating the nature of existence and space and gravity and all that stuff, but also it feels like a breakup album, a heartbreak album. Before I go song by song, let me just prove my point about 2001. So I think this album is very inspired by 2001, the Stanley Kubrick movie. And here is the cover of the album by k.rool, and on the other side is 2001, a scene from that movie. Okay? So what you see over here is a monolith. This is a weird thing where Squid came out with an album called Oh Monolith, and I think that's also inspired by this movie. So I had a vote on my YouTube channel, and it turns out more people voted for Squid, but when I checked, more people were voting for k.rool. What are you going to do? You know, so you had this monolith on there, and then there we see off in the distance another planet, and then here's the cover by k.rool with a monolith and that there. And I think that's on purpose because 2001: A Space Odyssey really plays with the isolation of space, with the loneliness of space. It is a human story as well, the story of Dave, and it is a story of a sort of cosmic gumbo of pain and terror and all that, but also it's about just his loneliness. So this little monolith here, I see as having a little red head on top. You know, and he's just walking along. And this isn't the moon. This is Liverpool. You know, he's there in Liverpool looking at the Mersey. So that's the correlation there, all right? If you haven't smashed the like bucket yet, look at this. Look at that. And you know, I printed that out myself. I don't edit these things. I don't have graphics, so there you go. So let me give you an example of the song with the stamp, click above the banana above Dave, with the song Hamburger Phobia. It's in the middle of the album, and it's got a great example of what makes this album so great. This funky and nasty broken drum set that is being played like mad. Absolutely amazing drumming, matched with the other part of the rhythm section, this rumbling bass that's sort of like the lead here. Just the drums are absolute madness. When the guitar comes in, it's also mad. Mad in the British term of mad, not bad in the American term of like angry. It says a lot about our cultures, I think. We take the word mad means angry. Anyways, I'm just taking the piss out of us Yanks. You know, when the guitar does come in, it's that little bit detuned, and there's like multiple layers of detuned guitar lines over each other. This must be the heritage of bedroom pop, because when bedroom rock, when you make music in your bedroom on a computer, you can have as many layers as you want. You know, you're not restrained by tracks, you know. And then for the chorus, like this what sounds like it's a slightly detuned guitar plays something that's actually something sort of catchy. And then the second verse, the drums get even nuttier. There's like these echoes on the drums that are just great. Then some saxophone used so sparsely, and maybe some backwards guitar sounds or just kind of sweeping guitar sounds. And then that saxophone gets more up front. It becomes almost like an alarm. There's so much happening. He's able to make it feel like there's nothing happening and like there's so much happening at the same time. It's a sparse atmosphere that is dense as hell when you actually look at it. The lyrics feel very important, especially when we get to this chorus, Hamburger Phobia, which I looked up. It means fear of hamburgers. Now, this ends up becoming the break line. So like I said, almost every song has a break line where things get distorted or weird or start to change. And especially at the end with just saying hamburger phobia, he picks it up with like an ow, but instead of getting crazier and harder, it gets softer after this repetition, after this break line. We have these plucked strings, quiet saxophone. Again, so much is happening. The lyrics are a great example of the disassociative style of just a weird guy thinking too much on a bench, right? His lyrics are sort of like, and I speak from experience, often I have very deep, very interesting thoughts. I do. And I just wish that someone would walk up to me and be like, hey, stranger, you're looking really hard at that tree. What are you thinking? And I could tell you, well, I've been thinking, how long has it been there? Was it here before the park arrived? Was this perhaps a place where native tribes would run through before the old world came and imposed its will on the new? Has it been here for all those kinds of whatever kind of random thoughts I might be having? Like I say it a lot when I was a kid in elementary school. I used to just stare down the sewer grates and just kind of look at what's going on. The lunch aide, Mrs. Bonanno, she was really worried about me. And she even contacted my parents, or at least my teacher, and I just looking down there. But what I really wanted was for someone to say, hey, Skye, what you thinking about, smarty pants? They called a number around 10 to 8, picked up a burger, I walked away, sat in the park and slowly ate. I think the birds want to murder me. Unearthly cured disease, human race, and deep beneath the burger grease, they pecked my brains, not much is in there, but nobody's safe. Do they care about the state of your status or how many days on earth you was paid? And as I lay, the mildew soaked me through the sky, let me know I wasn't the only one who felt this way. Hey, bud, it's okay. Maybe you just watched some Hitchcock, maybe you just watched The Birds, maybe you watched Birdemic. I don't know what it is, but he's sitting there and he's eating a burger, and he thinks that the birds want to eat him. The birds just want to eat the burger, and he goes on this kind of reverie, this kind of strange thought about existence and his brain being eaten and not much being there, and nobody's safe. I'm not mad because we're all loads of beef sitting on the side of the highway having our butts sucked by flies. Now, that's not an actual lyric, but that's essentially the sentiment that he is saying here, where he's just sort of imagining his own existence not mattering and just passing on. And this burger, I don't know, he's eating an animal, then animals are eating him. I don't think this is a meat is murder kind of thing. But it's more of just sort of like the feeling of eating an animal and then realizing animals want to eat you, the sort of circle of life, but also the pointlessness of the circle of life, how stupid and meaningless our whole existences are, kind of circle of life sort of thing. Then we get the chorus, then we get the second verse where it becomes much more personal. A lover kicks him out of the car, but then he makes it cosmic. So he gets kicked out of a car, and then he goes into I separate into the minutest, minuscule gaps of time and space, now put back together. All my memoirs were erased, vanished forever. Our love is just a fugue state. So his whole essence gets torn apart by the particles, like being beamed up in Star Trek or something. Right? He's just totally molecularized and then put back together as someone different. And it's that space that he's talking about, minuscule gaps of time and space. This is a trick that he's doing because he is talking about space in terms of space as in terms of outer space, but also any scientist or anyone who studies science understands that space is equally interesting in the microscopic as it is in the microscopic. So now it's the space in between his molecules that are being erased. And then he just has that chorus that just becomes wild of just saying hamburger phobia, and then again that's the break line that leads to the quiet bit. Are you seeing how much is going on here? Because I imagine some people who voted for Squid kind of put down King Krule. I don't think there's any need to put down one if you like the other. But it is deceptively deep. It is a deceptively deep album that is deceptively rich and deceptively textured. Okay, let's go through the rest of the album a little bit quicker here with the opening track, FLIMSIEST. I said a little quicker, but hey, I'm a language teacher, okay? If you don't know this, people in other languages don't have comparatives and superlatives the way we do in America, okay? So big, bigger, biggest in other languages is big, more big, the most big. Okay, that's how it is in almost every other language. So sometimes the first things that people learn in English, such as the assimile method in French, it was very famous because in order to teach you English, you open up the book and on the very first page, the very first lesson you get in English, imagine you speak no English and it says, my tailor is rich. My tailor is rich. My grocer is richer than my tailor. That's the first line that they learn. Now, the reason that I'm spending time with this is that there's a lot that's implied with this. So with the word flimsier, what's great is that flimsier implies a middle state. Once you imply something is then immediately the listener, the viewer, whatever, understands there's an implied flimsy and flimsiest. Later in the album, flimsy appears, which means we have constantly in our mind flimsiest. It is implied, is an implied flimsiest. And I think that's how we're supposed to think of k.rool. And I think that's part of his weeble wobble guitar style, walking along the Mersey and just flimsy and just about to fall over. You know, most guitar players and singers are trying to show rock hard, like a rock, I'm rock hard, like a rock. I just wrote an AC/DC song. You know, they're trying to do, unless that already is an AC/DC song. It might be. That's in general the position, especially that male singers try to put forth, but part of what makes this whole movement and this whole artist so interesting is he's telling you, flimsy. Hi, I'm k.rool. I'm a singer. I'm going to play guitar. I'm going to have a drummer. And flimsy, okay? That's his aesthetic. Great quiet guitar chords, some single notes. Again, the guitar sounds simple, but it isn't. Drums come back after the guitar line gets established with a little bit of synthesizer as well. Gets bigger in guitar. This song, more than any other song on the album, reminds me a lot of Pavement, a great 90s flimsy band. Discordant Bland as well. What I like about most of the songs here, too, is his phrasing. I guess jazz is often mentioned when talked about k.rool, and it makes sense because his phrasing sounds jazzy at times. It's not very regular, and that allows for more poetic lyrics. And when the night bleeds, it could love me forever. The break phrase in this song is, it's been holding the world forever, which gets repeats, and then there's a great Neil Young style guitar, and there's even at the very end of the guitar line, what I believe to be the Smells Like Teen Spirit notes, which are these. I believe he plays those actual notes at the end of the solo. I don't think it's intentional, but it's just a funny, when you play Smells Like Teen Spirit on guitar, like that's how you play the entire song. So just happen to notice those sounds. I think that's coincidence. The drums are so delicate in the repeated chorus, and then this is where I noticed there's some strings. This is that time. Remember I told you how freaked out I got? I was listening when I was putting the book together and I was trying to get the turtle clips together. I don't think they're called turtle clips. Do you know why I said turtle clips? Because the next song is called Pink Shell. What does he mean by that? Does he mean that? I think he does mean that. This one is totally different. A lot of variation. Even though the atmosphere on the album is so consistent, there's a lot of variation in the way the songs present themselves. This is like a bass riff with like chorus. Almost sounds like early Chili Peppers. And I mean that in a good way. Really like punky sounds, punky singing, very strangely parsed spoken word, punky atmosphere. I've been in your shell, I nailed your girlfriend. Like, what? This isn't the kind of guy he's been presenting himself. Then there's this beautiful little saxophone solo. God damn, I love the saxophone in this album. Some deceptive complexity, a little bit of laughing. Then he says he's slimy, so maybe he's just being in this. Maybe he's putting on a persona. We're golden, but only in the sun. And then beautiful production at the end with cutting out and coming back, and then some saxophone. We then get to Seaforth, which goes back to the very Merseyside feeling of this album. Wait, Liverpool's on the ocean too, right? My knowledge of geography is very American. Yeah. Anyways, it's not far from the ocean. I don't think you're far from the ocean when you're in Liverpool. You might not always be right on it, depending on where you live. Tell me if that's correct in the comments. And make fun of me for being an American. Just weird drum machine, chorus on the guitar, almost a vibe song. Almost like a regularity to this song here, which I don't like quite as much. What meaning of this feeling is some of the most straightforward lyric writing he has here, but then he gets a little bit more cosmic. We separate across the blades of growing grass. Again, that's the sort of microcosmic sense of space that permeates this album. The breaking line of the song is, "This faith is all I have." And the whole thing's about Seaforth, which is a town in Liverpool, which I read a little bit about, is pretty interesting. Beautiful, amazing ending with little instances of the saxophone here and there, and then some seagull sounds. Which again just reminds you, yeah, of course it's on the ocean if there's seagulls. I apologize, England. It's not my fault. It's the education system. And my own maintained ignorance. Nice little acoustic guitar. What I like about this at the very end here is there's like a little slide up on the acoustic guitar, and it makes the guitar almost sound like it's making a loop, like a computerized loop. And then the next song plays in a very similar way. That is my life. That is yours. One of these sort of songettes, not like a full song. The British accent is most pronounced here. Kind of jazzy, sweet guitar. It sounds like a round, like row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Row, row, row your boat. It sounds like that. I don't know where you are tonight. And then it starts again with where. Clearest lyrics here, talking about Bishop's Gate. Hey. British people, I looked it up. I typed in Bishopsgate, Liverpool. Bishopsgate is on Liverpool Street in London. So I guess we're not in London anymore. This song feels like it's a song about like establishing boundaries. Okay. Have you ever been dating somebody and they think that your relationship is more open than you do? Hey, we've all been there a couple times. It's fun. It's great. It's a great feeling. Oh. You were. Oh, he was? Oh, you did. Neat. No. Me? Problem? That? With? I'm modern. It kind of feels that way, like I don't know where you are tonight, but also it feels like he's not really like shaming. It's more like there's a misunderstanding, more that sort of sense of space. Great breakdown, crazy saxophones, just drums are going nuts. I love how nutty this album gets, and that's a scientific term for a crazy cuckoo, right? Gentle reprise of the chords from the beginning. This is the beginning of a suite of 3 songs. It doesn't really matter that it's not really a song because it's sort of like the beginning of the next part. The Tortoise of Independency. Jazzy guitar, some discordant sounds there, very bedroomy, builds with the guitar, nice flute in the back. She feeds a tortoise of independency. I don't know what this is, but again, this is this relationship that he seems to be having where there's this question of space. The previous song was like, where do I end and where do you begin? And what kind of autonomy do you have? What kind of boundaries do we have? And then here, like feeding the poetry and like he's always in this trance. He's like talking about holding on to a moment. He seems to always be trying to hold on to these memories with this woman. The break is I think about the dreams that I've had so long. After so long, there's like flute madness, continuing the flute from the last song. At the end, he's just yelling so long over the chorus, just all these flutes and so long. Till we get to the end of this little sweet, empty stomach space cadet. I am very hungry. It is lunchtime. I'm a little bit of a space cadet. Where it leads directly from the last song. It's like a drum machine. So the drum machine is so far away. But underwater, just cut up and haunting and weird in the back. The bass is super strong. It gets stronger. As the verse goes on, this great snare sound, maybe you're watching. Most people who watch my videos already like the stuff I'm reviewing, which is cool. I try to bring up when I can things you might not have noticed. So next time you listen to Empty Stomach Space Cadet, listen to the sound of the snare drum on the verse. As it gets louder, this double snare hit. It's amazing. As the lyrics start, he has this kind of whammy bar flourish, almost like a Hawaiian sound or surf sound. And then the first verse, if I died tomorrow, no one would shed a tear or load my frickin' lard carcass into the mud. No coffin, please, just wet, wet mud. I'm sorry, no, that's not what he says. He says, if I die, throw me into the trash. there's a real simplicity to that line. If I die, throw me into the trash. And there's sort of going this theme of mortality, which maybe ties into Man Alive as well. Sort of the sense of the human body being nothing more than like a piece of hamburger, the bottom of a wrapper that you throw into the trash. The real question of the value of life. The second part is like an inversion of the bass line, and the bass line's been pushing things along here. Nowhere to go, but it's erosion. It takes away. It's the breaking point, and there's so many sounds. The saxophone here takes over the hooky bass line that started off the whole song. And there's even one point where he sings in a way that is sweet. Just in the background of this song. Listen again to Hungry Space Marine Cadet, whatever it's called. Listen in the back. He's sweet. He has a sweet voice. Next song is Flimsy. Little backwards sounds. It comes in from the last song as well. This reminds me strongly of the soundtrack to Dead Man by Neil Young, the Jim Jarmusch movie starring Johnny Depp. This is sort of like a halfway palate cleanser. Hamburger Phobia, which I already discussed, is next. Then we get From the Swamp, a very energetic guitar matched by a drum machine. This feels like it could be an attempt to make like a Cure song style pop song for a quirky romantic comedy. Still, though, the guitars are detuned, kind of a drab verse. This has the most predictable delivery. This is not really jazzy. This is sort of regular. He talks about claustrophobia, which is again a question of space. Right? That's the thing they say about space, is that it's very claustrophobic. That it's not just that you're in a little like you're in like a little like spaceship, but just that there's so much space that you feel like you're stuck. So I think that's part of the idea, the claustrophobia and agoraphobia of space. And insomnia as well, which is something I struggle from. Little guitar solo, not particularly. He's not shredding, but it's a very tasteful guitar solo. The saxophone sounds detuned in the back. The chorus, this is the break point, back it goes, and this is about going back to the swamp. And this is where we get back to the sort of cultural moment that we're living in. So Viagra Boys released Cave World, not Town, Cave World. Proto Martyr released their album last week. There's a real kind of moment here where there's a lot of talk about de-evolution, as you hear my baby crying upstairs. And this is what this is about, going back to the swamp. Human beings came from the swamp. And so there's a real sense that we're kind of like, all right, this one's garbage, trash it. We'll just start again. Just start again, go back to the swamp. When I was trying to study the post-punk moment, when I started this channel 5 years ago, it seemed that a lot of things were questioning the nature of existence. Now it seems as though the general zeitgeist amongst mostly educated, slightly alienated people making music is that humanity messed up and we need to start again. And that's one of the themes of 2001. That's part of the representation of the monolith, of things kind of starting over again. The cyclical nature, how much our progress ends up leading to nothing. I think that's what it's about. Back it goes. It ends on a very resolved sounding chord. There's a yell in the back of a female voice. I timed it perfectly with the sound of my female baby crying up there. Well, signed female at birth. Not old enough to have any other answers. Sea Girl is the next song. And that has this Ravina, and I don't like having a guest appearance on here. She's good. This is a good voice. Like, this is a good song. But the whole alienation and sense that we're just like floating into space, that we've been cut off and that we're just flying around in the claustrophobia of space, I don't really feel it in this song because now we have another person coming in. But fortunately, she's basically just singing the way he sings. This like warbled full drum set comes in, all these layers, almost shoegazy here. She becomes an echo as he starts singing. There's like place for a little guitar solo, but instead it's not a guitar solo. It's just like these low notes, like a whammy. I mean, a wah-wah pedal is like wah 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 wah. Has a kind of sound. It goes wah wah. That's why it's called a wah wah. If you just leave it open, it just has this kind of like weird sound. It sounds like he's on a wah wah pedal, but not going wah wah wah, just going wah. Otherworldly synthesizers come in. And here the lyrics appear to be about like woman as the mystical water. It's a thing that goes back centuries, millennia. The image of sort of man being stone, like a mountain, and woman being water, like an ocean. Listen, I don't make this stuff up. I just interpret it. I think it's all a bunch of malarkey. I think women and men are not are not oceans and mountains, but rather human beings, much more interesting. But this does appear to be sort of around the theme of woman as a mystical water entity. Next song is called Our Vacuum. Total tape warbled sound to begin. Catchy guitar line. Bass comes in very gently, very nicely. The most engaging vocals. It's evenly matched, like the lyrics are evenly matched to the rest of the band. And this is a great example of the style of singing that he has, the style of lyric writing, where it's like, it's our vacuum is the break line, and there's the vacuum of space. That was the joke about atmosphere earlier. There's no atmosphere in space, but the whole album has this spacey atmosphere. And it's our vacuum, but also the vacuum between somebody. But then also, if you've ever lived with somebody, a vacuum can often be a symbol of a bad relationship. If you live with somebody and it's not going well, fighting over vacuuming or fighting over a vacuum is a great representation of failed domestic bliss. Why am I saying domestic? Domestic. Failed domestic bliss. It's like domestic mess, So like this being the break line, it's our vacuum, ends up being like the real center. Like even just listen to the rest of the lyrics, So empty this space, it weighs heavy on my plate, and in between us is a grave in a field far away. So again, he's imagining his body being dead and in a field, in the wet mud, but then also, that like the space between him and then this space, the space that's between them is also the space of infinite. It's also the claustrophobia. It's also the agoraphobia. And after the it's a vacuum, the vocals totally change. It's almost spoken word, like jazzy underneath. The bass gets stronger, the guitar gets to be more individual notes, kind of like jazzy accents with like a whammy bar, like just tons of like jazz chords. Butterflies fly around, things might get better. The only real hopeful note on the album. Space heavy. The title track has these guitars. I don't think he plays with a pick very often, at least I don't get that sense. The drum is just ride cymbal and some syncopated snare hits. Here, the breaker, it's again barely even a song, is just the word "my plastic straw" over and over again. And at the end, there's like a full grunge guitar line that sounds like a bass line, like punky yelling of "my plastic straw." Again, that's the sense that you have of the solipsistic, the navel-gazing sense of sort of obsession with one's thoughts, almost intrusive thoughts, just thinking about his plastic straw. Great guitar solo, goes back to an A part. Very rarely does the song go back to the A part. Does this album go back to the A part? This one does. We then get to When Vanishing, which is one of just the absolute sweetest songs on the album. The back half of this album is so good and so strong, and really lays into this theme of space that it's almost like a concept album by the end, because you just sort of feel like here he does a trick where there's a sound that I think King Tubby was the guy who originated it. Maybe it was Lee Perry. I don't know. But someone back in the day in Jamaica figured out that you can make a cool sound by picking up an amplifier and dropping it. It almost sounds like a lightning strike. So he's kind of doing that. But at the same time, as that's making noise, he has this string quartet, which has been at the edges of the album, coming right forward. And it's this crashing sounds and this gorgeous string, and you really imagine him vanishing. I imagine him vanishing off into space. I imagine him just flying just into the absolute nowheresville, like sultry, it was a rainy night saxophone playing. The whole song is so gorgeous, and then it leads into If Only It Was Warmth, one of my favorite songs on the album. The last couple songs on this album are just unspeakably gorgeous. This warm bass sound, and the way the warmth of the bass sound interacts with the guitar. I know it's called If It's Only Warmth and it's a song about coldness, but still, just very agreeable sounds, very resolving sounds. We're far away from the levels of detuned disagreement of previous. The drums are all the way in the back, totally in space, other side of the airlock. Again, though, the snare is super present and intrusive. I keep running out of space for your mistakes. Again, playing around with the word space that you can't avoid. Walk 2 hours across empty space to fill the void. We have the void, and again, it's the space that represents personal space and cosmic space. So it's the space between, because the personal space becomes the cosmic space. It's a simple metaphor, okay? The void of space being like the void between me and you, my darling. But it's well executed, and it's done so poetically and so abstractly at times in such a weird soundscape that you can forgive how standard of a parallel is to say, the space between us makes me an astronaut. You might think that we're in orbit together, but we're not. I like this too because it's a sense of disappointment where the woman, it seems to me, the woman is disappointed with him running out of mistakes, but then what he really wanted was warmth, and that's why the break line here is, if only it was the warmth that you held. I think what's implied here is what does she hold for him? She holds contempt. I think that's what's implied. Instead of holding warmth, she held contempt. And as somebody who has been in relationships which were more open than I thought, which are not the worst kinds of relationships, it's kind of an ow relationship, but it's not devastating. But if you're in a long-term relationship that's cold and filled with contempt, that's a real problem. And what you learn is eventually what you want is warmth. And I'm a happily married guy now. I'm very happy with the baby that's upstairs is crying and that baby's mother. And I'm in a very happy state here and say that this is a very true statement. And I wish for King Krule and for you watching that you learn to find and accept and share warmth. Because that is what you really want. And that is not what you get when you are in the coldness of space. He doesn't want to be heavy space. He wants to be light warm. Beautiful sounds at the end. It sounds like he's actually running a pick down the guitar fret, so maybe he does use a pick. Almost like distorted chaos pad sounds, gentle guitar lines, and it all segues directly into Wednesday Overcast, which, again, I just sort of think about Liverpool. I've never been to Liverpool. I've been to Manchester, not Liverpool. It just didn't fit on our itinerary. But I imagine it being overcast quite a bit. Cool thumping drum machine. So much variation in this album. Like I said, odd sounds in the background. It's all led by a bass that's just very simple, less fancy chord progressions here. I just love all the variation. Talks about taking a train to the coast. Again, I'm imagining this very sort of isolated, lonely person, singing about having an empty stomach. Hunger is a big theme here. Hunger, coldness, heaviness, space. There's a whole word cloud I could make for you of this album, and it all fits together. More that chamber orchestra, that quartet, I don't know what, talking about like racism and 10 cups of tea. And then we have the final words of the album, which are just so gorgeous and poetic. I'm just going to read them. His place was forgotten from history. I lay in silence before we arranged to meet. The mirror was small and behind lots of trees. My head was empty. My life was discreet. A lot has changed. Now a lot means to me. There's no break line in this album. I think he's trying to end it with this sense. Now a lot means to me. A lot has changed. Now a lot means to me. It's confusing. It's a confusing lyric. Now a lot means to me. So I think what he's saying is that before he was kind of nihilistic. His head was empty. He didn't really believe in anything. He felt this coldness, this silence. But now a lot means something to him. But there's something about the way these lines are put together that they sound agrammatical. They do not sound grammatically correct. A lot has changed. Now a lot means to me. But if you say now, a lot means to me. But like a lot of what? There's still a lot of ambiguity there that's in this line, that's in this whole album, that's so beautiful. I don't know if he's making it out. I don't know if he's making it out of space. I don't know if it's going to be I Can't Let You Do That, Dave kind of situation. I don't really know. But I know that I really appreciate this album, and I love thinking about it. I love the atmosphere I was able to have. These are my Patreons. I got a new Patreon sheet. Y'all are giving me so much support, which is awesome. So these are just some of the Patreons. I got these other new Patreons now who are here. So if you're one of these folks, you're gonna have to like pause it, because it's like look at all these new guys and ladies and NBs. You know, look at all of them. Look at them. Look. Read those names. Read those names in amazement that they're supporting me. I think I'm going to buy this album. I think I am. I really like King Krule. And I like King Creole. And I like King k.rool. I got to admit, sometimes when I just feel like being a little sassy guy, I'll play as King k.rool in Smash. I will, because that belly move is so awesome, because they think they're going to hit you, and then you're like, ooh, and then they go flying. A very satisfying character to play. Lacking honor and dignity, but satisfying. All right, well, there you go. Until next time, where I'll finally get to that Squid album. Oh, Monolith. We'll be back in space. We'll be back in 2001, here in 2023. There's the camera.